Hello everybody, my name is Zen and welcome back to my Star Wars Ranked and Reviewed series where we're ranking and reviewing the entirety of the Star Wars universe. We're starting with the movies, going through all 9 Skywalker Saga movies plus Solo and Rogue One, and then we're going to jump over to the TV shows, and we'll also be doing the TV shows as they release and any extra movies that come out, and maybe if we get to the end of all that, I will go and do all of the video games. In the previous episode, which was the first episode, we ranked and reviewed Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, which, because it's the only movie we've done, it got to number 1. But it's not going to stay at number 1, I'll tell you that. Spoilers for the ranking of this episode. I think that it's fairly obvious that this movie is better than Episode 1 if you watched the movie like I did just now, and I finished it up. So every time that we do one of these episodes, I'm going to be watching the thing that we're reviewing and then jumping right in and giving my thoughts on it. I, of course, encourage you to watch along with me, and as I said in the previous episode, this is fairly spoilery across the entirety of Star Wars, so if there's certain things that you haven't seen, then you might want to jump in and try to get those things watched, such as the Clone Wars, which we will get to when we get to the TV shows, but anything that I spoil in those shows that is, in my opinion, relevant to whatever we're reviewing. So like in this movie, we're going to talk a little bit about the Clone Wars. Then I will mention it beforehand. So that way you could skip ahead a couple minutes. You don't necessarily have to go watch those things. But just as a heads up, if you don't skip, like this review may spoil things in future things that you may not have watched yet. And if you're new to the channel, welcome. I'm glad you're here. If you want to see more stuff like this, definitely let me know down in the comments and the whole comment section. By the way, we're encouraging everybody to discuss their thoughts with civility, and we're going to be kind of figuring out how everybody feels about these movies as we go. I encourage you to share your thoughts on this particular movie or the last one that we did and the relations between them. And as I rank them and review them, if you disagree with where I've put movies, obviously feel free to share that. I encourage it because I think that the discussion is part of the process of figuring out, critically what these movies are. And as I mentioned in the last episode, I'm going to re-mention it here. My experience definitely changes how I will rank and review these movies. I don't mean like experience in life, sure, whatever, but I mean the experience of watching these movies and how I either enjoy it in the moment or not, or how the past viewing has affected the way that I think about it now. There's a lot of different things that subjectively are going to change the way I think about a movie compared to other people, and that's totally okay. The way that you think about a movie or the way that you rate a movie different than me is totally valid. There's nothing wrong with that. And if you like this episode, make sure to hit the thumbs up so that way it gets shared to more people and we get more people having a discussion with. And then if you want to support the channel, you can always become a channel member by hitting the join button down below. It gets you a bunch of like emoji stuff on YouTube that you can use on the channel. And then you get exclusive access to our monthly vlog that I do, kind of behind the scenes stuff. And coming up shortly, you'll also get exclusive access to some extra series that I'm doing, or rather early access to those as well. Finally, if you want to prepare for the upcoming episodes, you can see on the screen what the watch list is going to be, like the order in which we're reviewing these. So next up is Star Wars Episode 3, and then we have Solo and Rogue One, and then we go through all of the other episodes. We're not doing them as they released, their released order. We're doing them chronologically in the story because it's easier to talk about them that way. Plus, it saves some of the more spicy takes for last. I think that that's going to be really interesting. But without further ado, let's start with Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. This is an interesting movie, and I have a lot to say about it. It was released in May 2002, which was 3 years after the Star Wars Episode 1. So, quite a distance between those. They both have a budget of $115 million. Unfortunately, Star Wars Episode 2 did not make the box office that Episode 1 did. It was only $653 million, as opposed to the 1.027 billion that Episode 1 made. Now, you can obviously look at that and go, well, I mean, episode 1 was, we reviewed it. It wasn't great, and there was a lot of bad things about it. There were some good things, but there was a lot of bad about it. So it's not really a surprise that episode 2 didn't make as much. However, there are some redeeming qualities about this movie that I'm excited to talk about. I remember going to the theater and watching this one as well when I was a kid. Goodness, 2002, I was, oh goodness, how old was I? I guess because it was May, I would have been 13, but that year I turned 14, so I was a bit older. But that kind of thing actually does have an effect on how you think about a movie, how young you are. I actually, at the time, thought this movie was really cool. There are some cool things in it, and I still stick by those today. Like, the clones are awesome. The whole fight towards the end is awesome. There's a lot of really, really good music in this, but as you would expect from John Williams, who just carries all of these movies on his back. And then there were some things that kind of I overlooked when I was a kid, such as the relationships between Anakin and Padme, and how that watching as an older person, I kind of see where things go wrong on that and how it doesn't work for me. But then, I'm also able to critically look at it and kind of figure out what does work. So we'll talk a bit about that. And then finally, there is a lot of interesting politics going on here that, and I'm going to say this a lot. You're going to hear this a lot. But, if you go and watch the Clone Wars, it fills out this movie a lot more. And you get a lot more out of it, especially going into the next movie. And I believe that the Clone Wars makes this a better movie and the next movie a significantly better movie, just because of the context that it adds to everything. However, you shouldn't need a TV show to do that, but it does have 7 seasons of TV to really explore a lot of character growth and stuff there, which you can't do in a movie. You have like 2.5 hours in a movie to do that. And that's a difficult thing. But the movie starts, we get our title crawl, and it's at this point that I'm already going to have to interrupt and be like, thinking back on Star Wars Episode 1, why wasn't that just a title crawl for this movie? Obi-Wan Kenobi's master, Qui-Gon Jinn, got felled by a Sith Lord named Darth Maul. And they found this kid named Anakin who is powerful in the Force, and now Obi-Wan has to train him, and a senator from the planet Naboo is, under his protection and stuff like that. Couldn't that first movie have just been a title crawl for this movie? It kind of feels like maybe that would have been a better use of that movie. Anyways, at that aside, we learn that it's been 10 years since the previous movie in the, in movie timeline here. So 10 years since the Battle of Naboo. And the Republic is facing a separatist movement. So a little bit of a civil war is about to break out. And this is cool politics because actually when you, and this is what I mean by the Clone Wars stuff, when you go and watch the Clone Wars, you kind of learn a little bit more about this. The separatists are completely within their right to want to leave the Republic. The Republic is, over the last 10 years, and even before that, not been the greatest. There's a lot of corruption, as we discussed in the previous episode, that is not okay for the Republic. And there's a lot of things about the politics there that, you could see how these different planets would be like, yo, we don't like this. We don't really want to be a part of the Republic anymore. And they try to separate from that. And when you watch the Clone Wars, you start sympathizing with the separatists a lot more than you think that you might. And that's a really good place to be in because it puts the quote unquote enemies into a relatable place. Like, they have reasons to leave the Republic that are totally valid and you agree with them. But then at the same time, you look at what's going on in the Republic, looking at the bad things that the separatists are doing, which is obviously fueled by Count Dooku, kind of, but he's just kind of the puppet, and obviously the puppet master is Palpatine, and he's pulling all those strings there, and he's orchestrating this civil war because it's that chaos that allows him to create space fascism, and we'll definitely talk a lot about that. But because of this movement, it is up to the Republic to decide whether or not they want an army of the Republic in order to enforce their rule against the Separatists. You know, the Separatists are armed. They have an army of droids from the Trade Federation. And as we'll see later in the movie, there's a bunch of different factions here that are at play. It's like a giant chessboard, and the Republic just doesn't have the resources to handle that. The Jedi are spread super thin, and yeah, basically Padme is going to Naboo to figure out whether or not the Republic should have an army. Now, what I find interesting here is I have recently jumped into the High Republic. So I've been reading the books, or rather I've been listening to the audiobooks, because the audiobooks for the Star Wars stuff are so much better than actually just reading it. It's like a radio play. They add like the sound effects, and the guy who reads them, he basically does all of them, and he does like really great voice acting for like all the characters. It's really good. I do recommend the audiobooks over actually reading the books. I don't do that normally. But you know, if you have the chance to sit there and listen to it, it makes for a really nice story. But I started with, I think it's called Light of the Jedi. What you learn about the High Republic is that there is no war during the High Republic. The Republic is at their height, at their peak, as the title suggests. And it's this kind of thing that has dissuaded the Republic from having an army to begin with. You know, if it's been at peace, why do we need an army? And this is kind of the first fracture point that we're seeing here of, well, peace is definitely starting to be shaken up a bit. There might be a war brewing here. We need an army to defend ourselves. And that all sets the stage, like narratively, for what could be a very good movie. Whether or not it is, we'll determine that by the end of this review. So you got Padme showing up on this really cool Naboo ship. You know, she's a senator. Apparently senators have way better ships than queens, because this ship is like huge compared to the one that we saw in episode 1. And then there is an attack for her life. You know, they think that she is going to be safe, and then the ship blows up and her double gets killed, so she avoids the assassination attempt, which kind of sets up the whole thing with Obi-Wan and Anakin. We're not quite there yet, because I do want to just quickly mention that the ship thing is going to tie into a theme that we're going to see across all of the movies, which is they like to change things up as far as like designs of things. They could have just used the ship from the previous movie, right? Why didn't they? This is something that does need to be addressed. Well, it's simple. Merchandising. You got to sell toys, right? You got to sell more merchandise. And in order to do that, you have to change the designs on things. That is the core of why things change. It makes sense narratively, like when you go from episode 4 to episode 5, and you get, you know, stormtroopers going into snowtroopers, and you get these different kind of looking stormtroopers. You're like, oh, this makes sense. They're going into the snow. Of course they would have snow gear on. It just makes sense. But the core of the reason that changes is because merchandising plays a huge part in the budgets for this stuff. We look at the box office budget of $653 million or whatever it was, which is a bunch of money, and that is a nice return on the $115 million budget. But that's not even like scratching the surface on the amount of money they make from merchandising. So the reason things change, the reason we get the clone armor, which are, you know, phase 1 clones in this movie, and then in the next movie when the war has been going on for some time, and then we get the phase 2 clone armor, and the reason we get all the different stormtrooper armor changes to the first order armor changes, and just as we go, it's merchandising, and that's the answer. That's the true answer to all of that. The in-world explanations for that, they don't really matter, but some of them make sense, some of them don't. It just happens to be the way that they change things up. But after this assassination attempt, the Jedi Council puts Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker under the protectorate of, or they are the protectorate of Padme. And you gotta just remember that the Jedi Council is the worst. They know that, they can sense the emotions of people around them, right? They're Jedi. They can sense this. They can sense Anakin. They know that he is this angsty teenager, and it's like, yes, let's put him under the control, or under the the watch for Padme, where he's going to go and keep an eye on her. And then they have the whole scene where while it's actually a really good discussion between Obi-Wan and Anakin, where they're talking about politics and everything, and then the droid comes in and drills a hole into Padme's window. I'm gonna come back to the whole Padme meeting Anakin in a minute there, but the second attempt on her life with the bounty hunter, and then basically Obi-Wan and Anakin talking politics, like that stuff is really interesting. But the fact that they think that it's a good idea to have Anakin protecting her, it's like, do you guys not remember what it's like to be a teenager? I mean, I guess, yeah, they grew up as Jedi. They were trained as Jedi from a young age, but they should know better. They're just like inciting an incident here. They're like saying, okay, let's put the horny angsty teenager with the good-looking senator who they already have a connection with, and that's going to be totally fine. I mean, to give the Jedi Council a benefit of doubt, it was Palpatine's idea to put Padme under the protection of Anakin and Obi-Wan, but they have the authority to say yes or no to that. And there's a funny little thing, like when they're in Palpatine's little chambers, where he suggests that, and Yoda gives him like this side eye. It even like zooms in on Yoda for a second, where he's like, he kind of like gives him a squinty face, like he knows something's up. And this is just after Yoda says something along the lines of the dark side clouds everything, so it's impossible to tell the future and everything like that. Like, shouldn't they? We're gonna come back to this, but shouldn't they be like, something's up here? Like, hold on, let's pull back for a second. Let's figure this out. This seems fishy. Why are you suggesting Anakin and Obi-Wan? Let's not do that. Let's find a better solution to this that's gonna work better, other than putting the angsty, horny teenager with her. Oh, and by the way, Jar Jar's here, but they've given him as little screen time as possible. And this is a theme that we also see in Star Wars Episode 9, because Rose we'll talk about, but she gets the same treatment. It's a character that is hated by a bunch of people, is memed on, and then that character is just not really seen in the next movie. It's unfortunate, because I think that they probably could have done something a little different with Jar Jar here, other than making him just more of a background character that is suddenly in a seat of great importance. Sure, it's been 10 years, right? Like, this character has had growth, obviously. It's not the bumbling fool that he was before. So, like, let's see a little bit more of that. Let's make this character more relatable. Let's make this character better. But let's not just put this character in the background and forget about him. That's kind of what they've done here, although he is in a place of importance. Anyway, so Obi-Wan and Anakin show up to Padme's place, and Anakin is just the most awkward teenager. And what I will say, let's put this front and center. Hayden Christensen is not a bad actor. I think this is the difference between Episode 1 Anakin and Episode 2 Anakin, is in Episode 1, Anakin was, I mean, the actor was terrible. He did not do a good job, and that can be also attributed to direction. So the director and the writers, which obviously George Lucas did not do a great job on that with him, and that set him up for failure. There was nobody there to really elevate that kid's acting or be like, oof, that was a bad take, let's try that again. And or maybe there was, and it was just bad take after bad take, and they're like, okay, this is the best of the worst. At that point, they should have just recast him, right? We don't know for sure what that story entails or how that is. We just know that the acting of the kid was terrible, and it ruined that character, and that character didn't feel like he even needed to be in the movie, really. Again, it could have just been the scroll of this movie. However, Hayden is not a bad actor. We see that in future stuff with him. We see that in other movies he's been in. He's not a bad actor, and he does a pretty good job. The writing and direction here is, in my opinion, for him to be an awkward, angsty teenager. And that's how he plays it. And in previous viewings of this movie, I just hated Anakin. I actually really didn't like this movie for quite some time because I hated his whininess. Oh my goodness, he's always whining about everything. Oh, Obi-Wan won't let me do this. But two things. As our oldest child starts becoming a teenager, I'm starting to realize, like, it's a little too close to home. It's pretty accurate. And at the same time, I think that was likely his direction and the way that it was written. I still don't like some scenes here. Like, he is so awkward with Padme. He's way too forward, and this kid should be flagged as a sexual predator early on in life with some of the weird things that he says. And even Obi-Wan, like, sends him looks and has to like be a dad and be like, would you stop, a couple times in this movie. But the thing is, he gets better. His acting gets way better, and the difference between the kid and Hayden is, I think Hayden takes his acting up a notch in the next movie. And I genuinely believe that he takes a lot of the feedback that he gets from this movie, and instead of just like letting it beat him down, he does rise above it in a lot of ways, and we'll see that growth of this character. So I want to note it now so we can watch the next movie and be like, okay, what did he take from the feedback here, and how did he adjust the way that he was playing the character to be cooler? And obviously there's a huge span of time between episode 2 and episode 3. All of the Clone Wars happened. Episode 3 is the culmination of the Clone Wars. It's right at the end of the war. There's been a whole war. This character has changed and grown, and it's a good way to be like, okay, let's change my acting. Let's change how I'm doing this. And it works. So I think that he's not a bad actor. I've hated some of the way that he delivers the lines here, but at the same time, it feels like that was the intention instead of it just being bad acting. But like, can you blame Anakin in this moment of being so awkward around Padme? Not really. I mean, he's been a Jedi, or he's been training as a Jedi. He's been a Padawan, and just like all Jedi at this stage, he's kind of been forced away from the opposite sex and away from any kind of connections, romantically, because that's not something the Jedi typically entertain, although even Obi-Wan has a romantic interest, as we see in the Clone Wars. But this, although that is a little bit more subtle than what's going on here. So I can't really blame Anakin for being super awkward. I mean, normal teenagers are already awkward around women, let alone poor Anakin here, who's been like sheltered. He's basically the homeschool kid who has suddenly gone to public school and is really awkward around everybody and needs to learn social cues, and he hasn't just gotten that yet. But again, he is kind of a brat. It's not his fault. It's just kind of both the character and the actor. It's not the fault here. And he is definitely a sexual predator in the making. And Obi-Wan is definitely his dad at this point because of just the weird scolding and looks that he gives him. He's definitely a dad. Now, here's the thing. We learn when they're talking, because like Obi-Wan's like, oh, you've been having dreams about your mom again. And it makes me stop and go, wait, why didn't you go get her? It's been 10 years, guys. Like, what, you have a rich friend, Anakin. Like, at the end of Star Wars Episode 1, you're hanging out with the Queen of Naboo. She's got money, right? Why don't you guys just go fix this issue to begin with and head this issue off and go buy Smee's freedom from Watto? Like, why wasn't this done immediately? Like, oh, we saved the kid. He was a slave, and he's like, oh man, it kind of sucks that we left my mom behind, that, she's stuck in slavery. Shouldn't it be like a huge priority to be like, oh, you know what? That does suck that your mom is over there. We can't free all the slaves, but we can at least free this one. Let's go free your mom and set her up so that she knows that her kid is off being, trained as a Jedi, and she doesn't really have to worry about it, and you don't have to worry about her. Let's just free that connection there, as opposed to being like, no, whose mom? Anakin's mom? Yeah, no, we didn't even know she existed. She's still a slave. But as we talked about earlier, the bounty hunters show up, or rather, the changeling bounty hunter is essentially hired by Jango Fett to make a hit on Padme's life, and sends in these crazy poisonous worms, and there's this cool scene with, R2 scanning the floors, and they get in and on the bed, and then Anakin and Obi-Wan both sense something is wrong, and they jump in there, and Anakin slices, dices them up, and Obi-Wan does the bravest thing ever. He just jumps out a window on a megalopolis and grabs onto the droid. That's a lot of faith in that. And we get a fairly decent chase scene here through Coruscant. We get to see a lot of Coruscant during this, and it's cool. It's like a very cyberpunky city, kind of what you would see in something like Blade Runner. And it really works. I like this scene. You also get a lot of good banter between Obi-Wan and Anakin. They've got the bants. They have fun little lines between them, and you can tell that they've spent the last 10 years together. And there's this weird teenager dad relationship going on between them, because and Obi-Wan's constantly disappointed in him, of course you lost them. I should have known, you went the wrong direction, you always seem to do this. And then Anakin jumps out of the speeder and lands on the bounty hunter speeder, and there's this funny moment where Obi-Wan's I hate when he does that. So obviously, you have history here of this kind of thing happening, and it really sets the tone for what this relationship is like between them two. And I think it works, which is why I like this chase scene. But they manage to chase the bounty hunter down, which goes into this cantina. And while there, we have a couple of little trivia things, little interesting things happen. So the first is that the guy that says you want to buy some death sticks, that is the same guy who plays Mouse from The Matrix. And that's not the only Matrix reference in this. In fact, there's quite a huge homage to it. So you get the character who plays Mouse, and Obi-Wan does the no, you want to go home and rethink your life. That's interesting. And then Anakin starts walking around, right? He's stalking around through this place, and it's got this really fun, or not fun, it's got this interesting tone to it of looking around, kind of figuring out where this person has gone, and it's kind of tense, right? Which we'll talk about in a moment, of how this movie is actually a detective movie and how that's really cool. But as he's stalking around, he looks over, and on the left side of the screen, there's a woman who looks at him and kind of gives him a smile. And she takes his attention away for a moment. The focus of the camera goes to her, and she looks at the camera, right into the camera, and is kind of hey, That is the red dress lady from The Matrix. So you get this really cool interaction here between these two characters from The Matrix that is a clear homage to how that all works. And I like that a lot. It's one of those little tiny tidbits that when you're you see it and you're oh, that's really cool. And when you don't know, it's just kind of a part of the movie, which is a nice way to keep an homage in a movie without it feeling like it's on the nose a bit. But then the bounty hunter stalks up behind Obi-Wan, which you feel like it's going to be Anakin, but it stalks up behind Obi-Wan, and he slices the changeling down, and they take her outside and interrogate her. And right before she's able to give the information to the Jedi, she's shot with a dart, a mysterious dart from some random person, who's got a jetpack and everything. And they're obviously the bounty hunters of Jango Fett is way too high for them to catch him, so they just let him go. But here's the deal. There's always those little tiny nagging things that happen. So here is a minor spoiler for the Obi-Wan show. Minor spoiler. Okay, I'm giving you a chance. Skip ahead 2 minutes if you don't want to hear it. Otherwise, just stick with it. So that should have given you enough time. Here we go. In the Obi-Wan show, and we see this in other places as well in the Star Wars universe, Darth Vader just grabs a ship and pulls it back to him. That is Anakin, right? He has the power to do that. Even in this moment, he has the power to use the Force, and so does Obi-Wan. Couldn't they just force slow the bounty hunter midair? Just stop Jango Fett and then go up and get him and pull him down? Kylo Ren force slows somebody, and even force slows a blaster bolt, right? These two Jedi have the ability to do that. Why didn't they just do that here? Anyways, it's weird when you see powers that are inconsistent across the stuff, but it's hard to keep consistency like that in a world where you have space wizards. But after this attempt on her life, you get this interesting setup where the Jedi tell Anakin, okay, you're going to watch over Padme, and Obi-Wan, you're going to track this down and try to figure out who this bounty hunter is. And that sets up the rest of the movie in a fun way. Whereas the first movie, I couldn't really put a genre on it. It's just kind of a movie trying to be Star Wars in a way. Whereas this movie has a genre to it. It is a detective kind of noir movie where Obi-Wan is trying to hunt down what is going on or what happened, right? So he's going and trying to find out with the bounty hunters, and then there's the whole thing with the clones later, and it's this interesting mystery that is kind of woven throughout the story, and you're getting the resolutions of Obi-Wan's story as it goes around. It sets a fun tone. It's a really good middle movie, right? Between two other movies, it's the middle one. It's kind of like Empire Strikes Back, has a very specific tone to it because it can. The Last Jedi has a very specific tone to it because it can. There's a third movie after those small trilogies that allows the tone in between those two movies to be different, to be not necessarily fun or exciting or even fast. It could slow everything down and have an interesting storyline that is being told. In this case, it is this detective storyline, this kind of almost like Batman-esque storyline. If you watched the recent Batman with Patterson, I forgot his first name, playing Batman, it's kind of like that. Like, it's this detective story of Obi-Wan going and trying to figure this stuff out. And I like that tone a lot. I think it works for this movie. Now, there is some interesting things happening here. So like I said, the Jedi Council is basically saying, Anakin, you go watch over Padme. Obi-Wan, you go do your detective stuff. But they ask Anakin to go ask Palpatine to talk to Padme about this because they know that Padme is not going to go for it. So they're like, you have to convince Palpatine to go and do this. And we'll get to the Palpatine thing in a minute. But Mace Windu says something very interesting that I just need to touch on because it feels like a weird plot hole. Not even a plot hole, just an unexplained thing that you kind of are meant to extrapolate what they mean by this, but it never really ever makes sense, in my opinion. He says, if the prophecy is true, your apprentice is the only one who could bring the Force back into balance. He says that, obviously, to Obi-Wan. And at what point is the Force out of balance, right? Isn't the Force in balance to them? There's like this whole dark side clouding thing that they keep alluding to. But as far as they know, there might be just one Sith, right? Compared to all of the Jedi. How is that balance? That's not balance. What, balance is pure Jedi? Is that balance to you guys? Is that the Force being in balance? It's kind of weird because like they don't really describe what's going on. It would be different if they were like, yeah, there's all this weird stuff going on with the dark side clouding our vision, and as we learn later in the movie, which is totally just like a massive plot point that they just kind of jump over, which is like, oh yeah, our powers are diminished and we're noticing that. Like, instead of kind of pushing a little bit more on that and being like, this is why things are out of balance and something sinister is going on here, and kind of more leaning more into that and adding to the detective, the mystery and all that, they just kind of bring up like your Padawan's going to be the one to bring it all back into balance, but they don't mention how and why. Like, aren't again, there's so many more Jedi than there are Sith. That feels unbalanced. So maybe the prophecy is that they're going to balance it by taking out all the Jedi, right? Is that what the prophecy is meant to mean? I don't know. It's always one of those weird little things that I guess from a prophecy sense, prophecy is meant to be very vague, and that's how prophecy and story works, because by the time you get the conclusion to the so-called prophecy, you go, oh, that's what it meant. But that's you just attributing meaning to the prophecy, because the prophecy is so vague that it needs something attached to it to make sense to begin with. This is an interesting little writing technique there. But we see Palpatine pulling the strings again with Anakin rather, and is absolutely grooming Anakin. This is the first that we really see Palpatine start grooming him in a in a way that's not just like turning him to the dark side and kind of putting doubt and whatnot in his mind, but also like turning him into a weird sexual predator. Even more so, it's very odd, but it works for this character. It works for Palpatine because that's kind of what we already know him to have done to begin with. And man, I love Palpatine so much. He's such a good bad guy. Then we get some private scenes with Anakin and Padme, where Anakin is talking to her about how he feels like Obi-Wan is holding him back, and he could be so much better, and all this other stuff. And this is where the whiny teenager stuff comes in, and then Anakin gets really weird and forward with Padme, trying to quote unquote flirt with her, but doing it like a weird sexual predator, and that's the only way that I can describe it. It's like not cool. Like if you're flirting with women this way, don't do that. You're being really creepy. That's not how we do this. Then they get to hop on public transport and take off, and nobody's questioning whether this is really a good idea to have this teenager and this hot senator together. And that seems like a weird plot hole. Just like someone somewhere should have said something like, you know what? We know what normal teenagers are like. Hormones are running crazy. Maybe we should put, I don't know, like Plo Koon on the watch of Padme, or someone slightly more important who's not gonna mess this up. But putting Anakin there, that's putting a lot of trust in someone that the Jedi Council already does not have a lot of faith in to begin with. So it just kind of seems like they're setting him up for failure in a way. That's not great. What is great is Obi-Wan going to the diner and meeting with Dex. Dex is such a freaking cool character. It's also not the only time that we see his particular species in Star Wars, though it is only in the movies that we see it, I believe. I don't think there's any background times where we see the same species. In the Clone Wars, there is a mild spoiler. Don't even worry, that's not really that much of a spoiler. It's a whole episode or two. It might be 2 or 3 episodes, actually, devoted to a Jedi who is the same species leading clones. It's a really interesting story arc on that one. But yeah, it's not the only time that we see this particular species. But Dex is awesome. I love the conversation that he and Obi-Wan have. And again, the whole mystery thing, the Obi-Wan storyline throughout this movie is awesome. It's really good, and it's fun watching Obi-Wan be Obi-Wan and try to figure this stuff out. Mostly, there's some weird stuff that happens on the Kaminoan city of Topoka City, but it's mostly fun. And we learn about the Dart, and we learn about its origins to Kamino, and we also learn that it's on this planet where with Obi-Wan having to go to the Jedi archives and be like, well, I can't find this planet anywhere. He goes and looks at the Jedi archives, and he's like, hey, it's not here in the archives. And he asks like the essential librarian in the Jedi archives, like, what's going on with this? She's like, oh, well, if it's not here, then it's not here. Or actually what she says is, if an item, let's see if I get this right. Yeah. It's if an item does not appear in our records, it does not exist. And I'll tell you right there, that's the Jedi's biggest problem, is arrogance. If it does not appear in our records, it does not exist. That's what they say. That's literally what they say. And that tells you everything you need to know about the Jedi Order and how flawed it is. If it's something that we don't deem as an absolute fact, then it does not exist. So they're completely blind to the fact that someone can come in here and delete it. They even say later on, when Obi-Wan is meeting with Yoda, and they ask the younglings, like, what could have happened? And the youngling is like, well, maybe someone deleted it. It's like, it's the most obvious answer, and it takes them so long to get to that conclusion. Like me, as a child, I'm sitting there watching this movie, and I come to that conclusion. I'm like, someone must have deleted it then. Why can't they? It feels weird that they don't come to that conclusion faster, that Obi-Wan isn't like, well, I wonder, is it possible for someone to have deleted it? But he doesn't even say that until after the kid brings it up, and after Yoda's like, the kid knows what he's talking about. Yoda obviously comes to the conclusion when it is mentioned. He's just trying to test the children, right? But why hasn't Obi-Wan like really kind of leaned on that? It being like, oh, obviously someone deleted it if it's supposed to be there. It's just odd. And again, it shows a little bit of the arrogance here, but just kind of like, we were all thinking it. Why do you have to take this long to get to it? But eventually they decide that let's go to this spot in space and see where it's at. But it's an interesting idea that someone, a Jedi, has deleted this, and it plants the seeds for the characters that we're going to learn about later. And it's not the only time that we learn about Master Sifo-Dyas and Lord Tyrannus and all that. So that stuff is explored later in Star Wars. We're not going to touch on it now, but the whole idea of there's a Jedi who deleted this from the archives is really interesting. And it's at this point in the movie that we start getting these switches back and forth. We go from Obi-Wan to Anakin, to Obi-Wan to Anakin, to Obi-Wan to Anakin, back and forth and back and forth. And it's this weird clash of this awkward love story and this really fun detective thing going on. It's like you want to know more about the detective thing. It keeps cutting away from it to go to this really awkward relationship that's happening between Anakin and Padme. What I will say is the Across the Stars theme is freaking fantastic. The theme that they always use between Anakin and Padme, really nice. I like that song a lot, and it makes the scenes a little bit more bearable. But again, it doubles down on the idea. I believe Padme says there hasn't been a full-scale war since the formation of the Republic, when Padme and Anakin are talking about politics, which is an interesting little bit. Now, the thing I want to point out is we don't exactly know when exactly this kind of republic was made. It's possible that since the High Republic and now there's been a change where that war hasn't, like, let's say it's 150 years, and maybe it's 75 years that there was a war and then the Republic had to be remade, and we don't really know that time frame in between, but we can assume that they're talking about the High Republic, which is when the galaxy was not at war, and that's might be what she's referring to here, but it's not entirely clear, so we just have to make that assumption. It goes back to Obi-Wan, and we find out the freaking Jedi starfighters are awesome with their like little circular discs that they use to jump into hyperspace. It's fun. And we get some really cool scenes here where Obi-Wan goes down to Kamino, and the Kaminoans are weird aliens, but you know what? The CGI in this movie is not bad. This is the first movie, which, to be fair, is the second movie of the old ones that features CGI, is the first one of those two that you're like, this is serviceable. I can watch this. Like Dex in the diner, he doesn't look super great, especially when it gets really close to him. You're like, oof, the CGI on this is not aged very well. But the rest of the CGI is not too bad. The Kaminoans look interesting. They're weird aliens. You get this funny scene with these like spoon chairs that come down from the ceiling. They look like I don't know if they use these in the rest of the world, but anytime you go to like a Japanese restaurant in the US, you get like spoons that look exactly like these chairs to like drink your soup. That's what I think of anytime I see these. And then Tipoca City is awesome. I love the look of this city, the way that it's in the water, and you get like that Kaminoan riding that weird creature in the ocean and everything, and how the ocean is like constantly like in this storm during this, and it sets like an interesting mood. It's a lot of fun. I like I said, I like the Kamino stuff quite a lot. And when it comes to the clone army, there's a lot of cool stuff here too. We learned that the clone army was commissioned by an older Jedi at least 10 years ago, which obviously after the Battle of Naboo, someone comes and is like, we're gonna need an army, so they set up an army. But this was puppeteered by Palpatine and Darth Sidious and everything like that. So that setup is from that. Like this has the roots in Star Wars Episode 1, which is the best thing that I could say about Star Wars Episode 1 is it set up this kind of cool plot with the clone army being commissioned. But weird that the Kaminoans never really, after 10 years, don't really like call up the Jedi and like, hey, like, you want to come check out your army? Are you going to pay us? Did you guys pay up front? Because you got another down payment coming up here. It's been 10 years. You got to pay for the next 200,000 units. You owe us some money, and we just want to make sure that you're going to pay up and be good for it. The Jedi are good for it usually, but you never know, right? It's just kind of weird that never ends up happening. Then we cut back over to Anakin and Padme again, and there's the awkward line between the sand is like he hates sand, it's rough and coarse and gets everywhere or whatever. It's really awkward, and his pushiness is cringeworthy. Oh, it's so bad. It's hard to watch them. And those two characters have terrible chemistry. Their chemistry is non-existent in this part of the movie. And that makes it really hard to watch because you don't even believe that Anakin and Padme are slowly falling in love. To be fair, it is hard for them. It is hard for any movie to have a romantic story thread like this one in a 2-hour movie where it's not the primary storyline. The primary storyline of this movie is Obi-Wan and going and investigating stuff. This whole love plot does not have enough time to be interesting, to flesh out these two characters, to have interesting romantic, or not even romantic, just deep moments between these characters of a lot of interesting thought. We have the politics thing where they're sitting in the field and they're talking politics. We'll get to fascism in a second, but like that stuff needed so much more screen time to make this believable, and it needed their chemistry to be so much better to make it believable. It's not until the end of the movie that we get any kind of chemistry between these two characters, and that's unfortunate because it's the one thing I think is really dragging this movie down. And then we jump back over to Obi-Wan and we get to see the clones, and the freaking clone army is awesome. But most people watching this at the time are like, wait, aren't they supposed to be stormtroopers? Like, how did the stormtroopers come about? Like, we get clones, but then how does a clone armor become stormtrooper armor? Is this just a toy thing again? We see like later we see the Venators, the things that will eventually become Star Destroyers, but the Venators are like we see the Venators cut down and parted out during the intro of Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. And like scrappers are like, making a lot of money doing that. But like, why not just reuse them? Obviously toys and all this stuff. There's a lot of weird connections that you have to make to be like, oh, they needed more stuff to sell merchandise. So that's why the clones are different than the stormtroopers in a significant way. And stormtroopers aren't even clones. So that's another thing. But the thing that I like about watching the clones here is I know the clones story. I've watched all of the Clone Wars. I've gone all the way through that, and I've watched both seasons of the Bad Batch that are available as of making this. And that makes all of this so good because that puts so much context to these characters, the clones, and how they are not just faceless or the same faced creatures that are, essential flock for them to just like die in the masses, kind of like droids. They are individual characters who have individual personalities, and man, there are amazing clone characters that you get to know throughout the Clone Wars, throughout the Bad Batch, and further on, as we go into Rebels and even later on. And like Rex is an incredible character that we get to learn about, or all of the Bad Batch I really like, but you get people like Fives and Waxer and Boyle and Cody, like all of these really great clones that have interesting character arcs and everything. And the fact that in these shows, the reason clones aren't just numbers like they are referred to by the Republic and others is because they are individual characters, and they give themselves names because they are people. They're just people, and they have different personalities. And even though they're a clone, they're different from all the other clones. And there's things that bind them, but of course there's things that separate them. And that is what makes this interesting to me. And watching the Clone Wars, I cannot stress enough, makes this movie a better movie, because you look at this and you have a different connection to the clone army just right off the start. But we get that scene with Anakin and Padme sitting in the field talking politics. And he's just like, what we need is people to get together and agree. And she's like, well, they do get together and they do discuss things, but they don't always agree. And that's just democracy. That's how democracy works. And he goes, well, someone should be made to make them agree. And she's like, oh, yeah? Well, are you going to do it? Like, who's going to do that? He's like, I don't know, but somebody. And she's like, oh, are you making fun of me? Are you messing with me? And he starts smiling and he's like making it a playful thing. He was not kidding. He is all in on the idea of let's make them agree. And this is the root of all fascism. This is where fascism begins, which, by the way, Padme, red flag. You should have seen this coming. Red flag, bad idea. Back off. This kid is already a sexual predator. But this is a huge red flag, Padme. Like, don't do any ixnay on the relationship, you know what I mean? And the fascism thing is interesting because we see fascism take place and how it takes hold in the next movie and obviously the following movies and how all of that is a thread. We get real world analogs from actual fascism, Nazis being the best example of this because they were fascists, and Nazis are terrible and awful. And it's one of the worst things to happen in history is the fascist government of the Nazi regime. Now, we see a lot more of that in the First Order and how that's reflected. But we're only just now, like in the shows, starting to flesh that stuff out. And I think it's fascinating. We see really good glimpses of that in the sequel movies. But like, there's a lot more to explain here and show how the Empire is fascist. But the biggest thing is, with fascism, the way that you have fascism get rooted into the minds of the people who don't necessarily want fascism when you present it as an idea, an overarching idea to begin with, is you need to make people hate something. So the Nazis did it to the Jews. They made the people hate the Jews. They made them feel like the Jews were the enemies. That's the biggest part of fascism. We see the roots of that taking place in Andor, and Andor is a freaking fantastic show for that, and it shows it very, very well. We're going to talk about that when we get to Andor. But in this, we're seeing the root of that. Someone needs to make them all agree, which is we need a dictator, and that dictator is going to dictate who their enemy is. The Jedi are the bad guys. Let's all hate the Jedi, and we'll bind together and clear the Jedi out of the galaxy. That's fascism at its core, and that is what we're seeing here. Again, red flag, Padme, just eject. Obi-Wan goes and meets Jango Fett, and the tension here is really palpable. Man, this scene is really good. And then we get this awkward fight scene between Jango and Obi-Wan. But the mystery detective story, as I've mentioned, is like one of the best parts of the movie. This is kind of the culmination of all that, is this weird meeting, this awkward, well, it's not really awkward. I guess it's super contentious between the two characters, and then the awkwardness happens with the fight scene. We'll talk about the fight scene in a moment, but we learn that in between this and the fight scene that there's a huge plot point that's dropped from the Jedi, which is that our ability to use the Force is diminished. And like, what a great plot thread to use in this movie, but it really isn't followed through on. It's not really shown very well. It's just said. That needs to be described a bit more or used a bit more in the story than it is. And like, also, what a terrible thing to keep from the people that you've promised to serve and protect. Jedi, you guys should probably tell the Republic that your ability to use the Force has been diminished, and like, oh, we're in a bit of a bind here. Let's kind of work together. Instead, everything is separated, which is exactly what Palpatine wants. He wants the silos going on here of the different kinds of people and keeping secrets from each other and separating each other and keeping each other as enemies as opposed to binding them together. Which is that's a whole problem. Oh, by the way, Anakin has night terrors, and we learn that with Padme, and Padme confronts him on it. But this brings me back to the whole thing, like, Padme, has been spending this time with Anakin, even though they haven't seen each other for 10 years, surely someone should have just come up with the idea to go buy Shmi's freedom. Like that, it's just, that's a big plot point that I really don't like. Like they never really explain it either. They leave you to believe that the reason they don't buy her freedom is because they don't want Anakin having any connections. And they kind of say that in Star Wars Episode 1. They're like, you need to leave all your connections behind and go become a Jedi. But wouldn't it have been just a lot easier to free her? Isn't that the right thing to do anyways? I hate that about that particular plot point. And I think there's an important thing to mention here that is not shown very well in the movie, which is that the time that has passed between Anakin arriving at Naboo with Padme, or leaving towards Naboo and then arriving there and being there, it's not the same time that has passed as we're seeing with Obi-Wan. Like, Obi-Wan is going and doing his thing. He's doing his little detective thing. He's checking things out. But time is not equal here in these two storylines. One storyline is a larger set of time that's between Anakin and Padme. And then the Obi-Wan stuff is more truncated, but it's not shown very well, which is why their relationship between Anakin and Padme has progressed as much as it has, because there's a longer period of time here. The Obi-Wan stuff is happening essentially towards the end of that time. You know, it's taken him time to go do this detective stuff. And again, that's not followed through very well on the editing of the movie, but it's something that feels weird because it keeps cutting back and forth between the two when it really should just be, you know, a big chunk of Anakin, Padme stuff and kind of learning their stuff and being like, oh, I wonder what Obi-Wan's up to, and then finally cutting to it and getting like this really good section of detective work. I think that would have been a better way to do it, but they felt the need to keep jumping back and forth, which doesn't make any sense because the time passed is not indicative of what's passing with Obi-Wan. Like there's a couple jumps between Obi-Wan on Kamino and then back on Naboo where it's clearly been at least a day, right? They have new clothes on and we jump back to Obi-Wan and he's like still having the same conversation with the Kaminoans. It's like, okay, time is a weird thing going on in this. But the fight between Jango and Obi-Wan is like, it's a comedy of errors more so than it is a well-skilled bounty hunter getting the upper hand, in my opinion. You got this like awkward thing that happens between them where Obi-Wan's lightsaber gets knocked away and like, you've got Jango's like pistol being knocked away, and it's just like this bumbling mess of a fight that doesn't feel like it's two skilled combatants going at it. And then you have the thing where like Obi-Wan does the "This is Sparta" kick on Jango and knocks him off the side of Tipoca City, but he's, you know, been whipcorded. That is actually what it's called. It's called a whipcord. And it pulls Obi-Wan off, and then Obi-Wan has enough time to like get out of it and land, go back up an elevator, and then, you know, spend the time in the elevator with the elevator music, and then run outside and grab a tracking beacon and toss it at the slave one before it takes off. It's weird. I don't particularly like this fight, but it is fun to have some kind of stuff between them, because I'm going to skip the Anakin stuff for a moment, because you get this cool confrontation then where Obi-Wan is able to chase Jango to Geonosis, and while they're in space around Geonosis, they're in the what's it called, the asteroid field, essentially outside of it. It's more like a ring around the planet, and we get the coolest sound design in the world with the dubstep bombs, the seismic charges that the slave one launches out to try and destroy Obi-Wan. But Obi-Wan is able to avoid those, but he gets kind of duped by Jango Fett while piloting, and Obi-Wan has to take evasive maneuvers and then has to act like he's been shot down while the slave one makes its way down to Geonosis. And then once time has passed and it's safe enough for Obi-Wan to go down, he goes down in the middle of the night over the area that the slave one lands, and we get this really cool night shot on Geonosis where there's all the lurker hulks, the starships that the Trade Federation uses, and they're all landed, and it's like this really cool night city on this desert planet. It's awesome. I really like that quite a lot. Meanwhile, you've got Anakin who goes to Tatooine, right? He's got this thing with his mom where he's like, I gotta go take care of her. And Padme's like, okay, I'm coming with you. Like, I understand that you feel like you can't stay here to protect me, but that's fine. I'll come with you. I'll help. I'll be there for you. I feel like, we've had a bit of a relationship growing moment here, and I don't want to just leave you in this hard time. So let's go together. And they meet up with Watto, who is surprisingly forthcoming with information that he doesn't need to give. Anakin does not need to okay, here's the thing. This should be an obstacle to overcome. I feel like Watto should be like, hey, those people that I need you to rough up, I'll give you this information if you go rough them up. But instead of having any kind of thing to overcome here, Watto's just like, hey, here's all this information. Sure, whatever. I'm going to get nothing out of this, and I really should be getting something out of this, but I'm just going to let it go because it's Annie who left me and put me on hard times. Like, it just feels like a weird meeting there, but we learn that Shmi got sold and is now married to crap, what's his first name? Something Lars, which is a cool little thing that she kind of got to go have a nice little life. And then Anakin heads over to the moisture farm trying to find his mom, and we meet the Lars family, which, by the way, Owen Lars is such a good casting. 10 out of 10. They did a really good job casting him because that character plays Owen really well. And then I also think that his father plays the father really well, because that the way that his father is acting is the way that Owen acts in Star Wars Episode 4 New Hope. So there's this kind of cool thing happening with the acting of these characters that makes it feel like, oh, I understand who these characters are and how they're going to act. And again, the casting for Owen is really, really well done because he speaks the same and everything. It's like the same tempo and everything. And you understand that this is young Owen. But we find out that the mom has been taken. She's been taken by sand people, and that is why we have a missing leg, and he's too damaged to go and get Shmi back. And he's like, look, you just gotta accept that she's dead. Like, there's no way she's alive. And Anakin's like, no, I can feel it. She's alive. And he goes and broods outside, and we get this cool Darth Vader shadow where Anakin is standing there talking to Padme, but his shadow is that of Darth Vader. And they focus in on it, and they do just a shot of the shadows, and it kind of feels a little too on the nose. I think that could have just been a background thing. However, the cool touch here is that it is pointing to Anakin having a pivotal moment where he's turning to the dark side. Like, this is a pivotal moment in Anakin's story, and that's why they're showing the Darth Vader thing. Like, this is the thing. This is a inciting incident that's going to cause him to be this way. So Anakin goes and saves his mom. Although there's a thing where it jumps back over to Geonosis. We'll get to there in a moment because all the jumping back and forth is kind of annoying. So he goes to the sand people. I mean, he actually has to find Jawas and try to find information. He's on the speeder, but eventually he finds his mom and he frees her and he takes her back to the moisture farm. That's where we're going to pause that for a second, jump over to Obi-Wan, who is on Geonosis, and the Geonosians are super creepy, but we're introduced to a bunch of factions because they're meeting in this meeting room. So we're introduced to the banking clan. Obviously, we know about the Trade Federation and whatnot. Dooku's here, but we're introduced to the Techno Union. These are factions that get utilized very well in the Clone Wars series, and these are just setting the pieces for this chess event that happens during the Clone Wars. But it's really cool that they're able to set this up and then just never talk about it again in the movies. And yet a whole show was able to utilize these little pieces very, very well. I like it a lot. There's multiple plot threads in the Clone Wars about the banking clan and the Techno Union that you just wouldn't expect, because it's an offhand comment in this movie. Here's these two factions that we're never going to touch again. But let's talk about Anakin again. So now that we're kind of caught up on what's going on with Obi-Wan, he's sleuthing around. When Anakin is doing the slaughter of the Sand People, Yoda has kind of like a Force intuition, and he's feeling it through the Force of something terrible is happening right now. Anakin is going through so much pain. Again, this is a pivotal moment. This is his inciting incident that is causing him to become Darth Vader. If it weren't for this thing, I don't know, the Jedi Order was just like, yeah, let's go free your mom. If it weren't for this thing, he wouldn't have become Darth Vader later on. It's this thing that sets him on that path. That pushes him off the cliff to roll down that path. I think it's a better way to put it, because there's other things that we discussed in episode 1 that really set him on that path, and then this is the push off of the cliff. But we hear Qui-Gon's voice, and you hear it, and you go, oh, is that Qui-Gon? And then you turn on subtitles, and yes, it just straight up says that Qui-Gon says, he says, like, Anakin, no, like, no, and he's calling out to Anakin, and this is us being able to determine that Qui-Gon is in this moment with Anakin, and he's trying to call out to Anakin through the Force as a Force ghost. We'll talk about that in a second. That's really important. Trying to call out to Anakin to stop him, but Anakin is in such a blind rage that he is trying to kill all these Sand People. And this is such a terrible thing that is happening in the universe that even Yoda can feel it happening. And he's like, towards the center of the galaxy, and they're on the outer rim. Like there's this connection happening. There's a couple interesting things here. First, it shows that Qui-Gon has a vested interest in the continued commitment to Anakin being trained, because he feels, even post-death, such a connection here that he's trying to step in and stop Anakin. It's not shown well, but that is what is happening. Now, this thread is followed up in the Clone Wars. Obviously, a lot of this stuff is. And then even further in Obi-Wan. Okay, so here's your spoiler warning. If you don't want to know about this stuff and you haven't watched the Clone Wars, skip ahead like 3 to 5 minutes, just in case, and then see where I'm at, and maybe go back like 30 or 40 seconds. So that was your warning. In the Clone Wars, I think it's season 6, Yoda is contacted by Qui-Gon as a Force ghost. He's able to speak to Qui-Gon, and Qui-Gon is basically leads Yoda, and everybody thinks Yoda's going crazy. They're like, "Oh, he's finally senile. Like he's 800 years old. It's about time that this is the end of life care. Like we need to put him in hospice or whatever." Like that's how they treat Yoda in these couple episodes for this storyline. But Yoda is hearing Qui-Gon's voice and is led by Qui-Gon to go to what's the planet? To Dagobah. So he's led by Qui-Gon to go to Dagobah, because at Dagobah they're able to have a connection, a greater connection to the Force, which is basically like this set of spirits, this like Force spirit that teaches Qui-Gon how to become a Force ghost. Like Qui-Gon was already on the path to learning how to become a Force ghost before he even died. And this is a follow-up on that. So in season 6 of the Clone Wars, Yoda is called to Dagobah by Qui-Gon, and he starts beginning this process of learning how to become a Force ghost. Right? That's really interesting, because the reason Yoda goes to Dagobah in the original trilogies and why he's there is because after Order 66, he decides, I'm going to go complete this part of my life. I'm going to go complete this part of the training and become one with the Force. So he goes to Dagobah to, again, commune with Qui-Gon to learn this stuff from these spirits. It's like glowing, floating spirits on Dagobah. We get another follow-up to this in the Obi-Wan series at the end episode, where Obi-Wan's like walking out in the desert and Qui-Gon shows up and it's just like, there you are. It's time. It's time to begin. And he then contacts Obi-Wan to do the same thing. Like, hey, it's time to learn how to become a Force ghost. And that is why we have these characters become Force ghosts later on, is because of this moment where Qui-Gon is able to connect with like Anakin and like start trying to do this connection here, and then eventually call Yoda there, and eventually call Obi-Wan and start teaching him this stuff, which I find fascinating. I love that. But then Anakin takes Shmi back to the moisture farm, like I said. And this is where we really learn that Hayden is actually a good actor, because there is this insanely good scene, which some people could see it as he's just being whiny. And I think that a lot of people read it as that, because for the rest of, or for the earlier parts of the movie, that's what you're seeing out of Anakin. But if you stop and you watch this, it is such a good scene where Anakin and Hayden is acting like crazy here, where he does the, you know, I'll learn to stop people from dying line. Like, he's so emotional, like, over this. He's like, I can't believe this happened to my mom. I am going to stop people from dying. That is my goal, which obviously sets up the next movie. He blames Obi-Wan for holding him back. You know, he's like becoming really angsty and emotional here. And then we get the line, I killed them. I killed them all. They're dead. Every single one of them. Not just the men, but the women and the children too. They're like animals, and I slaughtered them like animals. I hate them. And that line delivery is just, it's really good. Chef kiss. You know, it's so freaking good. I love that line so much. The way he acts it, you see the emotion, you see the pain. And it's at that point you go, oh, actually, Hayden's a good actor, which is a good time for that, because the rest of the movie needs him to be a good actor for it to kind of work. Obi-Wan sends a message to Anakin, and he's a disappointed dad. He's like, all right, check Naboo. Yeah, he's talking to, what is it, R5 or whoever it is on his starship. He's like, check Naboo. It's like, oh, he's not there. Where is he? So he checks the signature. He's like, why? You're on Tatooine? Why are you on Tatooine? Like, oh my goodness, Anakin. Like, what are you doing? And he's just this disappointed dad, and it's so funny. I like the way Obi-Wan does this. But he sends a message to Anakin. Anakin then gets that while they're doing the funeral for Shmi. And this is when time kind of catches back up on both timelines here. So that tells you that he was kind of searching for Shmi for at least a day or whatever. And there's a weird timeline stuff here, but it finally catches up during the funeral when R2-D2 shows up, and he's like, hey, we got a message from Obi-Wan. So they go over, they send the message to the Jedi Council, and we find out that, you know, Obi-Wan's in trouble here. And you get this really fun moment between Anakin and Padme. Anakin's like, you know, he just had this pivotal moment, and he feels so scared of what just happened. He's not really sure about the emotion that he just put into that and what's going on. So what he says is, no, I'm not going. Obi-Wan told me to stay put, and that is what I'm going to do, because I'm really scared right now, and I don't think I can go through with disrespecting that. And Padme just goes, well, you were tasked to protect me, and I'm not leaving Obi-Wan behind. I'm going to go find Obi-Wan. So I guess you're going to have to come with me. And he has his little smirk, and it's a really good moment. And again, this is a great point for us to start seeing that Hayden is actually a good actor, because we need it. We need it in order to believe this relationship is starting to happen. We also see Jar Jar get played like a fiddle, because Jar Jar is basically standing in for the senator. And, you know, Palpatine's like, well, you know, if Padme were here, she would go to the Senate and propose that we get this clone army and use it as our army. And he's like, man, if only Padme were here, that's what she would do. And Jar Jar's like, yeah, you're right. And then we have the moment in the Senate where Jar Jar is like, I say that we give immediate powers to the Supreme Chancellor, so we were able to get this Army of the Republic, so we can stop this separatist movement. And by the way, these immediate emergency powers never get reversed, and this is how fascism begins. This is this is the moment it starts, is by him getting these powers, which is really bad. Anakin and Padme head to Geonosis, and Padme's outfit is just awesome. Like, her outfit is so good. I love it so much. I cannot stress that enough. I think that her outfit design at this part of the movie, actually for most of this movie, has been pretty great. But this particular outfit is like, it's like she had a fashion designer design it for her so she could just go to like a desert planet with it. And it works, although later on in the movie it doesn't work anymore. But right now, in this moment with the little cloak thing, it's pretty freaking awesome. Unfortunately, R2 and 3PO follow Anakin and Padme out, and the stuff is kind of lame. Their humor in this movie doesn't really get me, doesn't land for me anymore. There is one line that does. We'll talk about that in a moment. But like, they go into the droid factory with Anakin and Padme, which, by the way, the droid factory is my worst nightmare. Just a whole bunch of like giant choppy things moving around. It's terrible. But it is a fun little scene, and I would say from Anakin's delivery of the Sand People stuff to the end of the movie, like this is when the movie is really good, and it stays really good all the way through to the end. Even this droid factory stuff is insane and kind of crazy, but you know, it's good at the very least. And I forgot to mention the whole Obi-Wan getting captured thing, and Count Dooku having this fun little interaction with him, talking to him, being like, well, it's gonna be hard to free you, you know. But the thing that you don't realize necessarily is, unless you're like really listening to the conversation, because it's easy to go over your head, Qui-Gon Jinn was Count Dooku's his Padawan. So everything Qui-Gon learns is from Count Dooku. And if you want more information on this, like this relationship that those two had, go watch Tales of the Jedi on Disney Plus. It's little shorts, but they're really good, and we get to learn a lot about Dooku and why he becomes the way he is, and what his motivations are for joining the Separatist movement, and how he doesn't have any faith in the Jedi. It's really good, and it makes you like Dooku a lot, which is unfortunate because by the time we get to the next movie, he doesn't last very long. But this whole thing going from here to the Clone Wars series, you really understand where Dooku's coming from, and that makes him a fun bad guy to have because he's relatable. But eventually, Anakin and Padme go through their little droid factory thing, and 3PO, his body gets swapped with a B1, and they eventually get captured, and they're carted out into this like big arena. But before they go out, there's this awkward line delivered by Natalie Portman. And again, the chemistry between these two characters is not great, and it needs to be a lot better here. But there's a tiny glimmer. There's a tiny glimmer of their chemistry, which kind of works a little bit later. But in this moment when Natalie Portman's like, no, I love you, and every day with you has been like tearing me up, and it's been terrible because I want to love you and all this stuff. It's just, I don't believe it. And that's a problem. Especially because she's like giving this heartfelt plea to him out of a moment of desperation, of hopelessness. She's like, we're going to die. We're totally going to die. This is why I'm telling you this. I'm being honest with you in this moment because I didn't want to be honest with you before because it would ruin your Jedi training. And now I know we're going to die, or at least the chances are very likely. She's very hopeless. Unfortunately, like 2 seconds later, all of that changes. And we see that, no, she had a plan to get out of this to begin with. Like, she's not going to go down without fighting, which is cool because, you know, she's a strong woman character in Star Wars and does a really good job. Now, to be fair, Star Wars has great, strong women characters, and I love that about Star Wars. But they get chained up, and she's immediately like, I'm breaking out of this. Like, literally right after she gets chained up. Unfortunately, what that does is it kind of undermines the line that she just delivered to Anakin. Like, if you had confidence in trying to get out of this, and you really had a sense of you didn't want to ruin this for Anakin, or you didn't really think this would work, but you're only delivering this line out of sheer hopelessness, like, would she actually do it if she still believed that there was a way to get out? I don't know. It doesn't feel like it necessarily lines up. But again, from this point forward, the movie becomes incredible. They're all chained up. Obi-Wan's there. Obi-Wan has a fun little dad moment. You know, they're like, we got to focus here, Anakin. And Anakin's like, yeah, but what about Padme? And he's like, she seems to be on top of things, and does like this totally well-delivered dad joke, which is so funny. But then, you know, the creatures come out and they start working their way over to these like poles that they're tied up to. It's really tense. Unfortunately, you have this strong woman character that I was talking about in an awesome outfit this entire time. But then the little cat thing, I think it's called Nexu Cat, goes up and like scratches her. Like, she's doing fine by herself, but the cat goes up and scratches her and does this like kind of weird body harm thing that they try to make attractive by having like her ripped clothes and everything. And it just doesn't feel like it belongs in this moment. And I think it's unnecessary. What also is unnecessary is that, well, actually, I'll get to that in a moment. The rest of the Jedi show up and confront Dooku, and all of the Jedi are like way too dramatic when they like bust out their lightsabers. It's really funny, like over dramatic acting as they like all ignite their lightsabers. We get introduced to a bunch of cool Jedi here. It's a fun little scene, but eventually, with Anakin and Obi-Wan getting free and kind of starting to wrangle these creatures, the Jedi jump down and like throw them their lightsabers. And you have this weird little thing where Padme is not in a great spot. She kicks the cat down. The cat is pissed and coming back for her. And what you really want to see here is kind of like a Princess Leia thing with Jabba, where she like chains it up and like strangles the thing with the chain and just gets out of it herself, because it seems like she should be able to. But no, Anakin shows up and frees her. It's like, that's totally unnecessary. You should have just had this character free herself, because she's totally capable of doing that. Why have Anakin come in and do it? He's got other things to do. It's just a little complaint that I have. But the big fight breaks out. There's not a lot here to talk about other than it's a big fight. Jango dies the way Boba was thought to in Return of the Jedi, in an absolutely dumb way after doing just one or two cool things. He gets beheaded. It is whatever. I don't really feel like his death is necessarily earned here. It's just it goes back to the whole, he kind of feels like a comedy of errors anytime he's fighting. Like he gets kicked around by the beast and everything, and then he gets beheaded and whatnot. It just feels like he should be doing much cooler things here. Stuff like we see in the Mandalorian show, where the Mandos are doing awesome stuff. Jango just never really feels like he reaches that point. And then later you get the funny moment of Boba picking up his dad's head. It's like, that's kind of dark, kind of grim. But the Boba storyline is continued in the Clone Wars, if you haven't seen the Clone Wars. And it's fairly interesting how he's like goes from being a kid to being a bounty hunter. And they show that fairly well. The one funny line from 3PO that gets me is the die Jedi dogs. It makes me laugh every time. But outside of that, the 3PO R2 stuff, I just don't typically find funny in this movie anymore. But you did have the moment where, and I forgot to mention this, where Padme jumps down and lands on the back of the creature with Anakin and then gives him like a kiss on the cheek. It's at that point that I go, oh, I'm starting to believe this. Like that felt like chemistry. That felt real. That felt like a moment that would happen. But unfortunately, we didn't get that for the rest of the movie. It's just the weird awkwardness. Then when they're at their worst, when they're surrounded and they're about to die, the coolest thing happens in this movie when the LAAT show up, the LAAT. It's the transport vehicle that shows up, and just the coolest thing with the laser beams and the rockets and just everything saves the Jedi. Yoda's here. They get everybody out. We get the coolest battle in this movie, which sets up the rest of this movie to be just awesome and epic. Obi-Wan, by the way, totally knows about Anakin and Padme's relationship. In fact, I think it's very clear to everybody at this moment, because, they're flying. They're trying to chase down Dooku. Padme gets knocked out, and Anakin's like, we have to land. We have to go back for her. And Obi-Wan's just like, dude, like, relax, she's gonna be okay. What do you think she would do in this moment? And it's very obvious that they have a relationship, which that plot thread again is followed through in on the Clone Wars, and is really good, because Obi-Wan turns a blind eye to it for so long, but everybody knows. Rex knows, which is Anakin's clone commander friend, and just everybody knows. It's just nobody says anything about it, but everybody knows. The fight between the clones and the droids is awesome. You have the droid shooting down the lurker Hulk as it's taking off, and it creating all the dust, and you just get this really cool fight, and you're like, man, the clones are so cool, and they were prepared for this. And even the separatists are like, oh crap, there's too much of them, like we have to leave. And we get a little tease about the Death Star. Again, Dooku goes taking off, and they chase him down. When they finally reach the hangar where Dooku is, Anakin jumps in without thinking and just gets wrecked. But, Obi-Wan's fighting pretty well against Dooku and then gets knocked down. He gets like stabbed with the lightsaber, kind of glancing blows. Anakin jumps in to help him, gets his arm cut off, just like an idiot. But it's a good lesson to learn for Anakin, and we'll come back to that in the next movie. But the thing that I've been waiting to get to this entire review was when Yoda shows up. I remember so clearly being in the theater as a kid and everybody losing their mind when Yoda pulls out his lightsaber and starts flipping around like a maniac. And it was the only thing people talked about when they talk about this movie for the longest time. They're like, dude, that Yoda fight, Yoda is awesome. We didn't think that he could do that. And then he's just flipping around like crazy. And you're like, okay. When you say, as skilled as Yoda with a lightsaber, it's like, okay, yeah, you mean it. Yoda is really kind of powerful. We learned that Yoda was Dooku's master and taught him everything he knows, which tells you why Dooku is as powerful as he is. Plus, he's kind of leaned into the dark side. He's been training with Palpatine since he took out Yaddle in the Tales of the Jedi. Again, go watch Tales of the Jedi. It's really good, and they're shorts. Yeah, you get a lot out of it in a short amount of time. And honestly, it's some of the best Star Wars stuff that we've gotten in a while. Eventually, Dooku plays unfair, drops a giant thing down on Anakin and Obi-Wan. Yoda's forced to save them, but Dooku is able to get away and go back to Coruscant, where he meets up with the Emperor, and they get this moment of meeting in the hangar that everything with Yaddle happens, and where Dooku kind of becomes a bad guy, essentially, in the Tales of the Jedi, which is just kind of a fun little, connection there. Then we get the great line from Yoda: "The shroud of the dark side has fallen, begun the Clone Wars has," which all I can say is go watch the Clone Wars. Again, I keep saying it throughout this movie. Clone Wars is a great show. It's the first couple seasons feel like a kid's show. That's fine, but it gets really good. There's some bad episodes in there throughout, but once you get to like season 5, 6, 7, it's great. And season 7 is one of the best Star Wars things to happen. It's awesome. Plus you get the whole storyline with Ahsoka, and Ahsoka is one of the best Star Wars characters, my favorite Star Wars character, and it's totally worth it to watch all of that. But that's the end of the movie. Go watch the Clone Wars. So now that we've reached the end, what do I think? I think that this movie is not bad. It's not bad. I used to really harp on this movie quite a lot because I hated the way that Anakin is. But as I've gotten older and I've watched it a couple more times, a lot more times, I'm realizing it's not necessarily Hayden's fault. I think direction and writing is what led him to that, but we get glimpses of him being a great actor. And in the next movie, we see how great of an actor he is. And then in the Obi-Wan show, we also see he's a great actor. And I like that kind of stuff. But there is some bad here. There's no chemistry between Anakin and Padme. It's unfortunate, but at the end of the day, there's some weird little lines here and there, but it's not a bad movie. I enjoy it. I get to the end of this movie, I go, yeah, that was cool. Especially that last 30 minutes of the movie. It's just rocking. It's so good with all the clones and everything. I love the battle. I love the way it ends. And, we get the Imperial March theme. We're seeing all the clones at the end and everything. It's rad. It's really rad. And it sets up a TV show that runs between the length of this, the end of this movie, right at the end of this movie, essentially, to the incongruency with the next movie. The final season kind of happens congruently with Revenge of the Sith. So, yeah, I like this movie quite a lot. I get a lot of enjoyment out of it. The bad is hard to get over. I don't like the weird lines that are delivered by Anakin. He is a sexual predator and it's hard to get over. And there's some awkwardness there between the characters. And again, their relationship isn't that believable, but that's kind of the worst part of the movie. The rest of it is pretty serviceable. It's pretty good. I like the detective stuff. I like Obi-Wan, and I like the relationship that we're seeing between Obi-Wan and Anakin. And they double down on that in the next movie. And of course, now it's time to rank the movie. It's time to rank it, baby. Yeah, it's a nobody's surprise it's going above episode 1. there's no discussion that needs to be had here. Episode 1 is terrible. Episode 2 is a better movie in many ways. And I do believe episode 1 could have been at the title crawl for episode 2, and we shouldn't even had episode 1, and then it should have, had some, maybe the Clone Wars should have been more of a movie than, I don't know. There's like getting Ahsoka in a movie would have been great, and kind of the relationship between Anakin and his Padawan and everything would have been awesome, but we don't really get that. Unfortunately, we get that in the TV show, but then again, TV show does a really good job because it's got 7 seasons to build that kind of stuff out. So, yeah, this is a better movie than episode 1. Of course it is. And I don't think anybody's going to argue with me in the comments on that. Let me know, again, in the comments, what you think of this movie. What do you find good? What do you find bad? Do you agree with some of the stuff I said, or do you not agree with it? Are there anything that you're like, that is blatantly wrong, you're terrible at this? Let me know in the comments. I want to have the discussion. The whole point of this is to have the discussion in the comments and figure out what we all think of this particular movie, especially compared to the last one. If you want to do your homework, go ahead and start watching Star Wars Episode 3. We'll get there. We'll talk a lot about that movie. I've got a lot to say to it. It might be a longer episode than even this one is, because, again, there's a lot to say, and it's actually a fairly long movie, to be honest. And again, if you're not subscribed, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you know when the next episode goes up. If you want to see more stuff like this and you want to send it to more people so that more people watch it, we can all have bigger discussions, hit the like button. And if you want to support the channel, you could become a channel member by hitting the join button down below. With all that being said, I'm tired of talking about this movie. I'm excited to talk about the next one. You need to go watch the Clone Wars, and let me know if you have not watched the Clone Wars, if you're going to go watch it now after watching this video, because I keep pushing it fairly hard. I mean, it's on Disney Plus. You can watch through it all 7 seasons in a couple months if you're just kind of casually watching it. If you really push, you can finish within a month. So you can finish it within 1 billing cycle of Disney Plus, which is absolutely worth it. So all that being said, thank you much for watching, and we shall see you all next time.